What kind of love stares death in the face and walks into it anyway, not for glory, not for fame, but for you? Have you ever pondered the depth of love that would embrace thorns, whips, betrayal, just to set someone else free? Imagine a love so radical, so relentless, it chooses suffering to bring salvation. This isn't fiction. This is the heartbeat of the cross. This is Jesus. And this story isn't just ancient history. It's personal. It's purposeful. So lean in, because what you're about to hear could change everything. What if I told you that the most powerful sentence ever spoken didn't come from a king, a warrior, or a world leader, but from the heart of God, and it only took 25 words to shatter eternity and rewrite your destiny? Yeah, you heard that right. 25 words. That's all it took. Not a manifesto, not a treaty, not a speech in front of millions. Just a quiet, thunderous truth nestled in the middle of the Bible. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Sounds familiar, right? Maybe you've seen it on a bumper sticker, or stitched onto a grandma's pillow. Maybe it was printed on a shirt at a football game. But here's the truth. We've heard it so often, most of us stopped hearing it at all. But listen again. Really listen. For God so loved. Let's stop right there. This isn't cheap love. It's not the kind that fades when you mess up, or the kind that flinches when things get ugly. This is a so loved kind of love. Not liked, not approved of, not tolerated. No, so loved. So loved that he gave. And not just anything, not gold, not power, not a legion of angels. No, he gave his Son, his only, his begotten, the very heartbeat of heaven, the one who had never been apart from the Father, not even for a millisecond of eternity. And God gave him up. Why? Because you exist. Because the world, messed up, angry, broken, confused, sinful, was still loved. He didn't wait for the world to shape up. He didn't say, come back when you get it right. He loved first. And in that love, he gave. Do you understand what that means? This wasn't passive love. This wasn't a Hallmark card, a warm feeling on a Sunday morning. This was sacrificial. This was brutal. This was bloody. This was a cradle in a filthy stable and a cross on a hill soaked with sorrow. Let me tell you a story. There once was a man sentenced to death. He knew what he did. So did the crowd. The punishment was clear. But just before the executioner came, something happened. A stranger stepped forward. I'll take his place, he said. Confusion. Chaos. The crowd scoffed, but the judge, who had the authority, nodded slowly. You understand what this means? He asked. The stranger only replied, yes, I do. So the prisoner was unshackled, set free. The stranger took the chains, the sentence, the punishment. And as the man walked away, alive, stunned, he turned back and asked, but why would you do this? And the stranger, bloodied, bruised, but unbowed, simply said, because I love you, even if you don't understand it yet. Sound familiar? That's not just a story. That's our story. That's John 3:16. God loved, so he gave, so you could live. Let's go deeper. That whoever believes in him, whoever, not the perfect, not the polished, not just the pastors, the priests, the ones with quiet time journals full of check marks. Whoever, that means the addict, the angry, the ashamed, the one who doubts, the one who feels too far gone, the one listening right now, wondering if this message could actually be for them. Yes, you. Belief isn't about having all the answers. It's about trust, about surrender, about saying, God, I can't save myself. I need you. And when you do that, something eternal happens. Shall not perish. Those three words hit differently when you realize what perish means. It means eternal separation, darkness, hopelessness. But that's not your destiny, not anymore. Because then comes the greatest promise ever written, but have everlasting life. Life, not just one day in heaven, but starting now. A life that breathes with purpose, that glows with peace, that pulses with the presence of God. A life where your past doesn't define you, your pain doesn't destroy you, and your failures don't finish you. Everlasting means it never ends. Not at your worst, not on your darkest day, not when everyone else gives up on you. That's the power of John 3:16. Let me break it down for you another way. If you were the only person on this planet, God still would have sent his Son. Jesus still would have gone to the cross, still would have taken the nails, still would have whispered your name through a broken breath. It is finished, because that's what love does. It finishes the fight you couldn't win. It pays the debt you couldn't afford. It builds a bridge where sin dug a canyon. So yeah, it might just be 25 words, but it's the sentence that split heaven wide open. It's the verse that flipped the script on shame. It's the heartbeat of a God who would rather die than live without you. You want to know your worth? Don't look at your resume. Don't look at your scars. Look at the cross. And remember, for God so loved the world, that means he so loved you. Now the question is, what will you do with that kind of love? Because he already made his move. What if I told you someone wrote your rescue story 700 years before you were born, and every word of it came true? Sounds insane, right? Like something out of a sci-fi movie or a conspiracy theory thread. But this isn't fiction. This isn't fantasy. This is Isaiah 53:5, the verse that dared to describe the death of a savior before he was even born. Let's set the scene. The prophet Isaiah walks the dusty streets of Judah, eyes burning with visions he barely understands. The nation is fractured. The people are far from God. But Isaiah doesn't just see the present. He sees something coming. Something, someone. And then he speaks words so specific, so haunting, so wild, that they echo like a scream through time. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds, we are healed. Isaiah 53:5. Pause. That wasn't just poetry. That was prophecy, a cosmic spoiler, a divine drop of truth that would hang suspended in time until it collided with history on a hill called Golgotha. He was pierced for our transgressions. This line hits like a lightning strike, because piercing wasn't a punishment used in Isaiah's day. Crucifixion hadn't even been invented yet. And yet Isaiah describes in detail the exact type of torture Jesus would endure centuries later. Think about that. Nails driven into flesh, a spear ripping open his side, a crown of thorns pressed into his skull, the Son of God pierced not for his sins, for ours. This isn't metaphor, this is substitution. Crushed for our iniquities. Crushed. The Hebrew word here means to be broken into dust, to be utterly destroyed. Jesus didn't just suffer physically, he was crushed under the weight of sin. Your sin, my sin, the hidden stuff, the shameful stuff, the things you've never even spoken aloud. Imagine every wrong choice you've ever made, every lie, every betrayal, every secret. Now multiply that by humanity's history. He carried it all on his shoulders, in his soul. That crushing wasn't just pain. It was punishment, and he took it so we wouldn't have to. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him. Here's the twist. Punishment usually brings pain, not peace. But in God's kingdom, everything gets flipped. Because of Jesus' punishment, we get peace. Not just peace with circumstances, but peace with God. Reconciliation, restoration, wholeness. And it came at a cost. Picture it like this. You're standing in court, guilty, no doubt about it. The sentence, death. But just before the gavel falls, someone steps in. I'll take it, he says. And suddenly the chains aren't on your wrists. They're on his. The punishment? It still happens. But now it's him, not you, who pays it. And because of that, you walk free. And by his wounds, we are healed. This is the line that sends shivers down the spine of anyone who really gets it. He didn't just suffer so we could be forgiven. He suffered so we could be healed. Healed of what? Healed of guilt, healed of shame, healed of broken hearts, anxious minds, bitter wounds, and twisted lies we believed about ourselves for far too long. His scars are the receipt of your restoration. And here's the crazy part. He chose it. He volunteered for it. You're in a hospital bed, machines beeping. Doctor walks in and says, the only way you'll live is if someone healthy takes your place. Then someone walks in, perfect, spotless, strong. I'll take it, he says. They unplug your machines and plug them into him. You breathe. He stops. That's Isaiah 53:5. It's not just a verse. It's an invasion, a rescue, a ransom. And it was written 700 years before the cross ever existed. That's not coincidence. That's not luck. That's a divine blueprint, a love story etched into prophecy, fulfilled in agony, and sealed in blood. This prophecy wasn't written for scholars. It was written for you. For the one who wonders, am I really worth it? For the one who says, but I've messed up too bad. For the one holding pieces of a broken heart thinking I can't be fixed. The answer is in the verse. By his wounds you are healed. You, not just forgiven, not just tolerated, not just covered in religious band-aids, healed, restored, made new. There was a woman in her 30s, broken by betrayal, haunted by her past. She tried everything, therapy, substances, silence, but nothing filled the void. One night, she stumbled into a church. Just a guest, just curious. Someone read Isaiah 53:5. She didn't understand all the theology, but something broke inside her, not in a bad way, in a necessary way, like a fever breaking. She wept, not out of guilt, but out of relief. Because for the first time, she understood. Someone took the fall for me. Someone thought I was worth the scars. That woman? She didn't just find religion, she found healing. And she's not alone. It means you are deeply loved. So loved, in fact, that God would prophesy your rescue centuries in advance. It means Jesus didn't come just to inspire you, he came to substitute himself for you. He was pierced so you could be pardoned, crushed so you could be comforted, wounded so you could be whole. He was pierced for our transgressions. Not just a line, not just a prophecy. It was your name, written in wounds. It was your healing, purchased in blood. It was on B'nai screaming across eternity, I see your sin, but I choose your salvation. So the question is, will you just admire the prophecy, or will you embrace the one who fulfilled it for you? Because he already said, I'll take it. And now the next move is yours. What if I told you that the safest place in the universe isn't a bunker, a bank vault, or even a hospital, but right in the middle of your worst storm, as long as God is near? Yeah, sounds wild, but let's go there. Because when everything feels like it's falling apart, when anxiety is screaming louder than logic, when you're surrounded by questions without answers, Psalm 73:28 drops a quiet bomb of truth that can anchor your entire soul. But as for me, it is good to be near God. That's not a poetic line for a coffee mug. That's a spiritual survival guide. The writer of Psalm 73, Asaph, wasn't just anyone. He was a worship leader, a man of God, the kind of guy you expect to be full of faith and fire. But he wasn't writing this psalm from a mountaintop moment. He was writing it from the edge of spiritual collapse. If you read the whole chapter, he starts by being deeply frustrated. He looks around and sees wicked people thriving, people who mock God living in luxury. And here he is trying to live right, yet suffering. Sound familiar? He's not just discouraged. He's on the verge of envy. He even admits it. My feet had almost slipped. He was about to give up, about to walk away, about to trade faith for bitterness. But then everything changes. Not because the situation changed, but because he got close to the one who never changes. But as for me, it is good to be near God. That one sentence turned a man's crisis into clarity. Because proximity changes everything. In a world obsessed with distance, social distancing, emotional walls, isolation behind screens, this verse calls us back to the ancient, soul-saving truth. You were made for closeness with God, not religion, not rituals, relationship. It's the nearness of God that gives you peace in chaos, not the removal of chaos. It's the presence of God that gives you strength to keep standing, even when life knocks the wind out of you. A young man was on the edge. Anxiety was eating him alive. On the outside, he had it together. Career, relationships, image. But on the inside, he was unraveling. He started praying, not fancy prayers, not polished ones. Just real, raw words. God, if you're there, I need you. I don't want verses, I want you. And slowly, silently, something shifted. It wasn't the anxiety that disappeared. It wasn't the problems that vanished. It was the presence of God that entered the room. He didn't hear a voice. He didn't see a vision. But he knew God was near. That moment changed everything. But as for me, notice how personal that is? Asaph isn't making a blanket statement. He's not preaching to the crowd. He's declaring his choice. In a world full of distance, in a culture full of noise, in a heart full of questions, he makes a bold, beautiful decision. As for me, it is good to be near God. It's not always easy. It's not always obvious, but it's good. Why? Because in nearness, we find three things. One, refuge. When everything else falls apart, God's presence is a shelter, a hiding place. not to escape reality, but to face it with peace. Psalm 91 says, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty." Not just visit, not check in occasionally. Dwell, live there, stay there. When you draw near to Him, He becomes your shield, not always from the battle, but in the battle. 2. Perspective. Asaph was drowning in confusion. But when he drew near to God, he says something powerful. Then I understood. You don't need a new situation. You need a new perspective. God's nearness doesn't always explain the why, but it always reminds you of the who. And sometimes that's enough. 3. Peace, the kind of peace that doesn't make sense. Peace that shows up in hospital rooms. Peace that whispers in courtroom verdicts. Peace that holds you when the job is gone, the relationship ended, the plans collapsed. Philippians 4:7 calls it the peace of God that transcends understanding. You know what that means? It doesn't require circumstances to cooperate. It just requires God to be close. Maybe you're there right now. Maybe the chaos is louder than your courage. Maybe faith feels like a fragile thread you're barely holding on to. Maybe you've been wondering, where is God in all this? The answer? Right here, right now, closer than your breath, nearer than your next heartbeat. But the question is, will you draw near to Him? Because God doesn't force Himself into hearts. He whispers, He invites, He waits. Final picture. Picture a stormy sea, waves crashing, wind howling, a tiny boat being tossed like a toy. In the center of the boat is a man, terrified, alone, desperate. Then another figure appears. He doesn't shout, he doesn't calm the storm. He just climbs into the boat. And suddenly the storm isn't smaller, but the heart is steadier. That's nearness. That's what God offers. He may not pull you out of the storm, but He promises to climb into it with you. But as for me, it is good to be near God. Not when life is perfect, not when prayers are answered, not when the sun is shining, but always. Because His nearness changes night into morning, pain into peace, distance into intimacy. So wherever you are right now, whatever you're facing, don't wait for life to make sense. Just take a step, whisper a prayer, open your heart, and you'll find Him right there. Because He's always been closer than you think. What if I told you that your tomorrow isn't empty, it's already occupied by God? Sounds crazy, right? But listen, while you're still panicking about next week, God is already standing in it. While you're lying awake wondering how it all ends, He's already written the last chapter. And that's not wishful thinking. It's a promise, a rock-solid, heaven-backed, chain-breaking truth found in Deuteronomy 31:8. The Lord Himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Let that settle in. God goes before you. Not your fear, not your anxiety, not your worst-case scenarios. God. Let's take a step back and set the scene. Moses is preparing to pass the torch. His time is done. Joshua is stepping up to lead the people of Israel into the promised land. But it won't be easy. Giants await. Fortified cities, enemies, unknowns. Joshua is standing at the edge of destiny and the edge of fear. He's never done this before. He doesn't have all the answers. He's not sure if he's ready. And that's when Moses gives him the word. Not advice, not a motivational quote, a promise. The Lord Himself goes before you. Let that explode in your soul for a second. Before your next meeting, before the diagnosis, before the heartbreak, before the breakdown or the breakthrough, God is already there. He's not catching up with your crisis. He's not reacting to your situation. He's not scrolling through your life like a feed, surprised by what happens next. No, He's ahead of you. He's setting the table. He's clearing the path. He's fighting battles you haven't even seen yet. Let me tell you a story. There was a young single mom, let's call her Sarah. Bills were piling up. Her job was hanging by a thread. She didn't know how she'd make it through the month, much less the year. One night, with tears in her eyes, she opened her Bible randomly and landed on this verse. The Lord Himself goes before you. She didn't feel brave. She didn't feel strong. But she whispered, God, if you're already there, help me walk forward. That week, she got a call from a former boss offering her a new position. Better hours, better pay. She hadn't even applied yet. God had already gone ahead. Here's the thing, this promise isn't just for Joshua. It's for you right now, in this exact moment. Because let's be honest, life gets scary. Uncertainty feels like quicksand. We try to plan, control, predict. But then things spiral. Jobs end, relationships shift, sickness hits, and the future suddenly feels like a dark, winding road. That's when Deuteronomy 31:8 becomes your anchor. He will be with you, not just ahead, not just over you, with you, in the room, in the hospital, in the courtroom, in the silence, in the chaos. You're not navigating this alone. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Let's pause there. People leave, people give up. Even the strongest relationships can fracture under pressure, but not God. He doesn't flinch when you break. He doesn't walk away when it gets messy. He doesn't ghost you when you doubt, question, or cry ugly tears at 2 a.m. He's not just present, he's committed. That word forsake in Hebrew, it means to abandon, to turn one's back on. God says, I'll never do that to you. Ever. Now here's where it gets real. This verse doesn't promise life will be easy. It doesn't say you won't face battles. It just promises you won't face them alone. And that changes everything. Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the presence of God in the middle of fear. Imagine this. A child walking into a dark hallway alone is terrified. Every shadow is a monster. Every creak is a threat. But that same child holding their father's hand, suddenly the darkness doesn't change, but their confidence does. Because they're not alone. That's what God offers. He's not saying, go figure it out. He's saying, I'm right here. I've got you. Keep walking. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Not because you're strong, not because the path is clear, but because he is near. Fear loses its grip when you realize the one walking before you is the same one who conquered death. Discouragement dissolves when you realize your shepherd never takes a day off. Let's flip the lens. Look back at your life. How many times did it feel like you were alone, but looking back, you now see the fingerprints of God? That job that opened just in time. That relationship that ended, only to save you pain. That moment you nearly gave up, but somehow you made it through. That wasn't coincidence. That was God, walking ahead, clearing the road, standing guard. Final story. There was a soldier in a war zone. Every night he'd recite Deuteronomy 31:8 before falling asleep. Not out of routine, but out of survival. One night his unit was supposed to patrol a certain road, but something in his spirit said, wait, not yet. They delayed by just 10 minutes. An explosive had been planted on that very path. The enemy thought they had the timing right, but they didn't factor in the God who goes before. That night, every life in that unit was spared, because heaven was already on the ground before their boots even touched it. So the next time fear grips you, the next time tomorrow feels like too much, the next time you wonder, God, are you even there? Remember Deuteronomy 31:8. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. He's not just watching your journey. He's leading it. He's not just cheering you on from afar. He's walking right beside you. So breathe. Take the next step, because God is already standing in your tomorrow, waiting for you to catch up. What if the greatest rescue mission in history wasn't fought with weapons or war cries, but with blood, tears, and a love that ran headfirst into the fire for you? Yeah, we're going there, because this isn't just a story. It's your story and mine, and the story of a Savior who chose pain just to pull us out of it. I want to take you back to a moment in my life when everything felt like it was caving in. Uncertainty wasn't just a feeling, it was the atmosphere I breathed. Fear wasn't a passing thought, it was my constant shadow. I was stuck in the what ifs. What if I fail? What if I can't fix this? What if I'm alone in this? And let me be real, I wasn't looking for a sermon. I didn't need another checklist of how to be more faithful. I needed something real, something solid, something true. So I turned to the scriptures, not because I was strong, but because I was barely holding on. It started simple. John 3:16, Isaiah 53:5, Psalm 73:28, Deuteronomy 31:8. Verses I'd heard 1,000 times suddenly felt like they were written for me in that very moment. For God so loved the world, he was pierced for our transgressions. It is good to be near God. The Lord goes before you and will be with you. And somewhere in that mess of tears, silence, and pages, something shifted. Not instantly, but gradually, like a sunrise that doesn't shout, but slowly warms everything it touches. I began to see something I'd never seen so clearly before, that Jesus chose to suffer. He wasn't forced. He wasn't trapped. He chose it. For me, for you, for every soul who ever felt too broken to be redeemed. Let me show you what that kind of love looks like. Imagine this. A firefighter hears the call. A child is trapped inside a burning building. Flames are raging. The structure's collapsing. Everyone's screaming, "It's too dangerous." But the firefighter doesn't hesitate. He runs straight into the blaze, no guarantee of survival, no promise of applause, just one goal: rescue. He finds the child huddled in a corner, smoke filling the room, heat unbearable. The kid looks up, terrified, but then sees eyes filled with courage and compassion. The firefighter picks him up, shields him, and walks straight through the inferno. He doesn't come out unscathed, burns, bruises, scars, but he comes out with the child in his arms. That's Jesus. That's what he did for us. He saw humanity trapped in the fire of sin and said, "I'm going in." He didn't flinch. He didn't bargain. He ran into the fire. And on the cross, through nails, thorns, mockery, and silence, he made sure we'd never be trapped again. That truth wrecked me. Because suddenly, I realized I was never alone in that dark season. He was there, in the hospital room, in the sleepless nights, in the unanswered prayers. I'd been asking for escape, but what I really needed was presence. And that's exactly what God promised. It is good to be near God. He will never leave you nor forsake you. I didn't need all the answers. I just needed him. And he showed up. In the quiet, in the stillness, in the whispers. Sometimes his nearness doesn't come like thunder. It comes like a breath you didn't realize you were holding, finally released. Here's the wild part. Nothing in my life changed right away. But I changed. Because when you understand that you are deeply loved and never abandoned, the storm doesn't have the same power over you. You begin to walk through fire with your head up, not because the flames don't hurt, but because you know who's carrying you through it. So what's the point of all this? What am I trying to say? Simple. This isn't just a nice set of Bible verses. It's a rescue letter written in blood and grace. A love story not made of fairy tales, but of fierce sacrifice. Every verse we've walked through whispers the same message. You're not forgotten. You're not too far gone. I see you. I'm with you. I've already gone ahead. Jesus didn't suffer to inspire us. He suffered to save us. Not abstractly, not collectively, personally. For you, for your scars, for your regrets, for your lonely places, for the secret battles no one knows about. He stepped into the fire so you could walk in freedom. So if you hear nothing else today, hear this. You are loved more deeply than you can imagine, by a God who didn't wait for you to get it right, by a Savior who didn't flinch at the fire, by a King who calls you worth it, even on your worst days. His sacrifice wasn't in vain. It was intentional, it was personal, and it was for you. So don't just admire the love. Respond to it. Draw near, rest in his presence, and walk forward knowing you've already been rescued. The fire didn't win, love did. And it always will. If this prayer spoke to your heart, don't scroll just yet. Type amen in the comments as your personal yes to God. And here's your challenge today. Speak life, just one word. Encourage a coworker. Text a friend. Bless your spouse or child. Let grace overflow from your heart into someone else's day. If you need a special prayer, don't hesitate. Drop it in the comments. We're not just here to post. We're here to pray with you and for you. May the peace of God guard your heart today, and may your words shine like light in dark places. Remember this, a pure heart speaks pure love. So let God purify your heart, because what's inside will always come out.